Bodybuilders. Whoops, not those bodybuilders. I'm talking about the automotive bodybuilders. The coach builders that made what are considered the most beautiful cars ever designed. Why are these cars so beautiful? Why are they always from the 1930s? And why don't we see a lot of coach-built cars these days? Welcome everyone to episode 56 of the Automotive History series, where we're going to appreciate the lost art of custom coach building. Coach building is exactly what the name implies, the design and construction of coaches and carriages. Before the introduction of motorized traffic, the craft of coach building was highly regarded. Back in those days, the average man's only means of personal transportation was his own 2 feet. The well-to-do owned horses, and the really rich owned their own horses and coaches, often richly decorated and extremely detailed to show off your status. As cars made their introduction in the early 1900s, they were nothing more than vehicles where the horse was replaced with an engine, and so the whole industry around building carriages evolved to become associated with the rising car industry. This also counts for the coach builders. They eventually dropped their horse-based coach business and adopted the car-based body business. The recipe is essentially the same, but adapted to the new times. Because what is coach building exactly? Well, it works like this. When the dust had settled by the late 1910s and 20s, so car makers were able to produce a chassis, engine and mechanics that were proven to be reliable, a new business arose. See, almost all the cars made during this time period are so-called body-on-frame cars, and the term is exactly what it describes. Car makers would often design a frame, or chassis, put all the ingredients needed on there, so suspension, brakes, engine, transmission, steering column, etc., and the frame would then be sent to the assembly line where a body and interior, so the seats, floor, upholstery, dashboard and the engine cover, etc., were bolted onto the frame, and voila, a regular production car is finished. Simple as that. But by the start of the 1920s and 30s, a group of nouveaux riches arose that would like to take things to a higher level. Sure, they could already buy a standard production luxury car, but you drive something that the others drive as well. In order to truly distinguish yourself from the rest, you wanted a car with a custom design. A car that was essentially your very own rolling signature. A unique one-off. A custom coach-built car. To get this done is fairly easy, you just need loads of money, as usual. Remember when I just talked about the body-on-frame cars? Often, general car makers would also offer the bare chassis for sale, so you could buy the frame with everything on it except the body. The rich bought these chassis and then sent them to a coach builder so that they could build a body on top of it that was designed according to the demands of the customer. Usually, the coach builder would start designing what the customer had in mind and see if it could match the dimensions of the chassis. As soon as the measurements were determined, the craftsman would then get to work by creating wooden frames that shaped the body parts. The wood used was often light, but also strong. When the basic shape of the body was finished, the craftsman would then shape and fold the metal, usually aluminium, to follow the curves of the wood. Sometimes steel presses were used, but often it was simply done by hand. Can you imagine that this takes a lot of time and effort? Call this an art, but there are some people out there that have different opinions.
This is a coach-built, hand-built car.
Hand-built is just another way of saying the door will fall off.
Anyway, when the body was finished, there was also room to make a custom interior that would match the exclusive looks of the body. Any fabric could be used to meet the rigorous standards of the customer, along with a dashboard that featured the customized layout and unique materials. And then I haven't even talked about all the extra features that you could build in. The end result looks pretty much like this. Especially the 1930s produced some of the most beautiful cars I think are ever made. And this begs the question, is this still a car or is this an art piece? Even if you don't know anything about cars, I guess almost everyone will agree that these cars are in fact beautiful. You cannot find this ugly. Especially when the Art Deco and streamlined modern movement arose, cars couldn't be more graceful looking. This is aerodynamic pornography. One of the first coach-built cars, and what I think is a perfect example of making something truly personal and unique, is this fella right here, the Swan car. The Swan car was a custom creation based on the frame of a 1910 Brook 25-30 horsepower. Sir Robert Mathewson, a rich Scotsman, wanted to shock the local elite in Calcutta, India. If the sight of an automobile in those days wasn't a big event in and on itself, imagine this contraption rolling down the street. The car was modeled after a swan and made out of wood. Beside its swan-like appearance, the car came with little lights in the eyes. Part of the cooling system is routed to its beak so that it can release steam through it. And get this, the car also poops. There is a little hatch on the back of the car that can release small amounts of whitewash to make it all even more convincing. The car generated quite a stir in India. The story goes that the police had to be called as people were terrified when they saw this pimpmobile rolling down the road. But to get to the point, when it comes to custom coach building, no wish is too demanding, almost anything is possible. Because less gimmicky and even more beautiful are the coach-built cars from the 1930s. Despite the depression that was going on, there were still some very affluent individuals with very deep pockets. Especially the French and Italian coach builders were notorious for creating one badass piece of coach building after another. I especially consider cars like the 1939 Delahaye Type 165 and the Type 175 as absolute masterpieces and leading examples of the beauty that is coach building. But don't let the name fool you. Oftentimes, the names of these cars, Delahaye, Delage, Bugatti, Cadillac, came from the manufacturer of the chassis. And most of the time, these companies did not design and make the body. That was done by a custom coach builder, most of which you and I have never heard of, like Chapon, Jonckheere, or La Bourdette. A great example is the so-called round door rolls. In the brochure, so to speak, the car is referred to as a 1925 Rolls-Royce Phantom 1. When I first learned about the car, I was astonished by its design. It's radical, but I immediately recognized it as being too radical and futuristic to be designed in 1925. The aerodynamic shape only made its introduction in the early 1930s. But then you realize that the body of the car is newer and rides on a chassis of a Rolls-Royce from 1925. Or, to put it in chronological order, someone bought a 1925 Rolls-Royce and it eventually switched hands and the new owner ordered custom bodywork in 1934, which was done by Belgian coach builder Jonckheere. And that explains a lot as the design fits 1934 perfectly. So, coach building seems to be a 1930s affair, and if you have been paying attention, you'll notice that we haven't seen a lot of coach-built cars over the past, 70 years or so. So it is safe to say that the industry has vanished. But why? Did buyers lose interest? Was an exclusive one-off custom coach-built car no longer exclusive enough as everyone with a bit of money had them? No, none of that. As the answer came from within the industry. See, the greatest friend of the coach builder is the general car industry, but that turned into its very own worst enemy. By the 1950s and 60s, many car makers switched from body-on-frame to monocoque, or unibody construction. What this means is that instead of bolting the body onto a frame, now the frame and the body were one piece. This approach leads to a more sturdy frame and increases crashworthiness, while also making the cars lighter, handle better, and in many cases, easier to produce. But as soon as a car is a unibody, it becomes very hard to make custom coachwork for it. You have to cut and paste all over the place while also paying attention to the structural integrity. Don't start with that. Let me put it this way. Custom coachwork is like rewriting a page you don't like. If the page is body on frame, you can rip it off and replace it with a blank page and rewrite your story exactly the way you want it to be. But when the page is unibody, it essentially means you have to rewrite the page by adding sentences and scrapping the old ones, but the end result is far from perfect. Now is it? So, with the impending doom of going out of business in sight, what did these coach-built companies do to save themselves? There are multiple ways, actually. The first one is that some companies thought if you can't beat them, joined them. So these companies became standard partners for the general car industry by providing bodies for mass production. See, sometimes general car makers are not willing to spend time, effort, and money on developing and producing car bodies, and they outsource it to coach builders, which have all the necessary equipment and experience. Think of Fischer, which was the standard body supplier for General Motors, or Karmann, which made bodies for Volkswagen and Mercedes. The second one is much like the first one, but Coachbuilder decided to rebrand itself as something of an exclusive design firm, sometimes expanding into fashion and other lifestyle design elements. They would also do work for regular car companies, but think of it as like more special editions or halo cars or concept cars. Especially Italians are notorious for their dramatic design like Bertoni, Carrozzeria Ghia, and Pininfarina. Then there were coach builders that said, screw the cars, we're gonna make something else, and focused on the commercial market, like making ambulances, hearse conversions, touring cars, fire engines, that type of stuff. And then there were some coach builders that resorted to making aftermarket automotive parts, or focused on car customization, like making limited run convertible versions or shooting brakes, or simply customizing the appearance of a car without changing the body. And so all is quiet in the land of custom coachwork. Somewhere in the 70s there was a Dutchman that ordered a unique body for his Mercedes 300 SEL, and Pininfarina was happy to do the job. And then there was the Italian coach builder Frua, who built a heavily modified European-looking GT, based on an American Chevrolet Camaro. But both these examples illustrate the demise of the custom coachwork. It resorted to changing some of the parts of the car's design, but not entirely redesigning the body from the ground up. And that begs the question, is there any life left for the automotive bodybuilders? For now, it seems unlikely. But hold on. There are still some body-on-frame cars out there. The last regular sedan to be built on a frame was the 2011 Lincoln Town Car. But today, especially Toyota still builds body-on-frame cars, but these are all SUVs. So, technically, it is possible to make a custom coachwork car, but it would ride on an SUV platform, and the question remains if this leads to a car with elegant proportions if it's not an SUV. But the rise of electric cars might give coach building a second chance. See, the industry big boys like Tesla, Hyundai, and BYD build their EVs on so-called skateboard platforms. The skateboard platform is a chassis that looks like a skateboard and has all the ingredients, like the electric motor, the flat battery package, the frame, the brakes, suspension, etc. It's a bit vague, but all the EVs that are built are technically unibody, although their body is built on top of the skateboard frame, but it's a bit confusing. But it doesn't matter, as the car makers also built the skateboard frame as a separate item. These frames could technically be used by coach builders to design their own body on top of it, and it has already been done in fact. There are various small-time companies that make limited-run sports car models based on skateboard platforms from some EV car makers. Other than that, the days of coach building cars are long gone. The 1920s and 30s are often referred to as the golden age of coach building. But the interest in these rolling art pieces is still there. Coach-built cars often win prizes at fancy car shows like Pebble Beach or your local Concours d'Elegance. Not to mention that these cars still sell for high prices and are a highly valued addition to museums and private collections, just like they were in their heyday.